Bright Duty. Every student matters.
So now we look at civil disobedience movement and the different phases of it. On March 11th, 1930, after previous notice to the Viceroy, we saw on March 2nd, Gandhiji is writing the letter to the Viceroy telling him of his intention to break the salt law. And Gandhiji, along with his 79 selected and trusted followers, started from Sabarmati Ashram, which is located in Ahmedabad, to Dandi, a village on the sea coast of Gujarat, which was 320 kilometers away. So Gandhi, along with 79 selected followers, starts from the Sabarmati Ashram and walks to the place called Dandi, which was almost around 320 kilometers away. And the object of his march was to disobey the salt laws by picking up lumps of natural salt on the Dandi coast. So the breaking of the salt law or the disobeying of the salt law was through picking up of lumps of natural salt or making of salt on this Dandi coast. Salt is the most necessary article of the common man's food. We know that salt is most common and the most necessary article for each and every individual. And the government doubled the duty on the salt and also prevented the making of salt from seawater. So during this period, the government is doubling the duty or the tax which is to be paid on salt. That is doubled. And there is also a prevention of making of salt from seawater. The common people were not even allowed to make salt from the seawater by themselves. And Gandhiji hoped that he would get the biggest support from the masses by breaking the salt law. And Gandhi at this point decided to start the civil disobedience movement by breaking the salt law because he felt this was an issue which every common man had been facing, and if he takes it as a national issue, it is for sure that he will get a large mass support. And as he thought, it happened. He received a large support from the masses, especially because Gandhi took the issue of the taxing of salt and the prevention of making salt by common people. And we see Gandhiji and his followers who started from the Sabarmati Ashram on 11th March reaches Dandi on April 5th. So almost a month it took to cover this distance of 320 kilometers. And on the morning of 6th April, he violated the salt laws which signaled the beginning of countrywide waves of civil disobedience. And on 6th April, he violated the salt laws. He made salt at the Dandi coast, and with it began the civil disobedience movement across the country. So this was a national movement and it began on 6th April with Gandhi making salt by breaking the salt laws. And the violation of laws, non-payment of taxes, boycott of foreign products, mass strikes and demonstrations shook the whole country. So along with the making of the salt, there were a lot of things happening which included violation of laws, which was unjust in nature but through non-violent means, and non-payment of taxes, boycott of foreign goods and the use of Swadeshi goods, and mass strikes and demonstrations or hartals shook the whole country. At this point, men and women came out in thousands to offer civil disobedience in response to Gandhiji's call. So, responding to the call of Gandhi, thousands of men and women of the country came in support of the civil disobedience movement. Foreign goods and clothes were burned at public places. So, as a symbol of boycotting foreign goods, we saw that those were burned at public places. The movement meanwhile reached the northwest frontier province where Abdul Ghaffar Khan, popularly known as the Frontier Gandhi, started an organization of non-violent Pathan warriors named Khudai Khidmatgars or the servants of God. So in the northwest frontier province, it was Abdul Ghaffar Khan who led the civil disobedience movement, and he had organized the Pathan warriors under the name Khudai Khidmatgars, which meant the servants of God, and this was a non-violent group. And here again we see that the government attempted to crush the movement through ruthless suppression. So the government, similar to the way they treated the non-cooperation movement, even the civil disobedience movement there was an attempt to suppress the civil disobedience movement through lathi charges, firing on unarmed crowd of men and women. So all these methods were used by the government to suppress the civil disobedience movement. And within a month, over 90,000 satyagrahis, including Mahatma Gandhi and other prominent Congress leaders, were sent to jails. So, within a month of the beginning of the civil disobedience movement, we see such a large number of satyagrahis, that is 90,000 satyagrahis, including Mahatma Gandhi, was sent to jail. So we now look at the three reasons for which the Salt March is notable, or the beginning of the civil disobedience movement is notable. So the first is that this event brought Mahatma Gandhi to the world attention. So now he acquired a lot of world attention with the civil disobedience movement. The march was widely published by European American press. So the reason why he got a lot of attention, especially in the international arena, was that the news of the march was published in newspapers of European and American press. Second, it was the first nationalist movement in which women in large numbers took active part in. So the participation of women made the civil disobedience movement a very distinct political development. The socialist activist Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay had enjoined upon Gandhiji to allow women to join the Salt March. So, the socialist activist Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay had joined the movement and requested Gandhi to allow other women who were interested to join the march. And Kamala Devi was one of the numerous women who courted arrest by breaking the salt and liquor laws. So the women, as we know, were active participants in picketing liquor shops and breaking the liquor laws, and along with that, the breaking of the salt law was also undertaken by a large number of women. And the third reason why the Salt March became a notable event or a significant event was that the Salt March made the British realize that their Raj would not last very long. So this is very important. The strength and the courage of Indians to come together to fight the British became very clear during the civil disobedience movement, especially the Salt March. And the British became very clear that their rule is not going to last for long and that they would have to give some powers to Indians. So then if they had to stay, it had to give some powers to Indians, or else the rule of the British will come to an end. So the civil disobedience movement made the British realize that they will have to make certain compromises. So after the launch of civil disobedience movement and its great success, we see that the British government takes initiative to have dialogues with the Indian representatives, because they realize that the civil disobedience movement is becoming a great success and all the Indians are participating in the civil disobedience movement under the leadership of Gandhiji. So the British government feels that now there is a need to talk to the leaders of the Indian side and to have dialogues with them. And it is around the same time that the Simon Commission is submitting its report in mid-1930. So we know the Simon Commission had come to India in the year 1928. So it was a 7-member committee which was sent to India from the British government. But Indians had opposed this commission because it had no Indian presence, or no Indian member was there in this committee to look into the affairs of self-government for the Indians. So this was the reason why Indians opposed the Simon Commission. And the British government summoned in London a conference of Indian leaders and spokesmen of the British government to express their views on the Simon Commission report. So when the Simon Commission report was submitted in 1930, we see that the British government is now calling for a conference between Indian leaders and the members of the British government, so that they can talk about the report submitted by the Simon Commission. But what we see is the Congress refuses to send any representative to the conference. So the Congress says that they don't want to be part of this conference called by the British government. It led to the fear that the conference might not be accepted by Indian masses. So now when the Congress refuses, the Britishers feel that the decisions which are taken in this conference may not be accepted by the Indian masses because Congress has rejected this conference. So the conference was adjourned to some future date. Adjourned means it was postponed or fixed for a later date. Now we see another development, which is the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. So the government was now anxious to have a Congress representative next roundtable conference. So the conference which the British representatives are having with the Indian leaders are termed the Round Table Conference. So, where these two sections are coming face to face with each other to discuss the issues related to the Indian governance. So, when Congress refuses to be part of the first conference, the British government is very anxious to have Congress representatives at least in the next Round Table Conference. And in pursuance of this policy, the government made an attempt to arrive at a settlement with the Congress. So, in order to make this conference possible, we see that the British government comes to an settlement or an agreement or a compromise with the Congress. Finally, in March 1931, Lord Irwin, who is the Viceroy then of India, and Gandhiji reached an agreement which is known as the Delhi Pact or Gandhi-Irwin Pact. So, the agreement which reaches between Gandhi and Lord Irwin, who is the Viceroy, is then called the Gandhi-Irwin Pact or the Delhi Pact. The government agreed to release all the political prisoners except those convicted of violent crimes. So, in this Delhi Pact, the compromise reached is that the government will release all the political prisoners, only those won't be released who are convicted of violent crimes. And now we see how the second Round Table Conference takes place. The Congress on its part agreed to suspend the civil disobedience movement and take part in the second Round Table Conference. So, as per the compromise reached in the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, Congress suspends the civil disobedience movement. So, the civil disobedience movement gets suspended and the Congress decides to take part in the second Round Table Conference. So, most of the Congress leaders and particularly the youth of the country were disgusted or disappointed with it because the government had not accepted their major national demands. So, this agreement reached between Gandhi and Lord Irwin and the government's and the Congress decision to take part in the second Round Table Conference was not accepted happily by the youth members and other Congress leaders. Gandhiji was not even able to secure pardon or at least get the death sentence of Bhagat Singh and his comrades commuted to life imprisonment. One of the major failures of the pact was that Gandhi couldn't even convince the Britishers to pardon Bhagat Singh and his comrades who were jailed or imprisoned by the British during this time, and not even commute their death sentence. Bhagat Singh and his friends were sentenced to death by the British government, and Gandhi couldn't even commute or lessen this punishment to life imprisonment. Despite that, Congress decided to suspend the civil disobedience movement for some time. So, despite all these limitations or failures, what we see is the Congress still decided to suspend the civil disobedience movement. So, at this time the civil disobedience movement comes to an end and the Congress also decides to take part in the second round table conference or RTC, and we see that Gandhiji went to England in September 1931 to attend the second round table conference. So, in 1931 Gandhiji goes to England to attend the second round table conference, and he attended the conference as the sole representative of the Congress. So, he was the only member from Congress to be there in the second round table conference. And Gandhiji emphatically demanded the grant of dominion status at once. So, the demand of Gandhi in the round table conference was the grant of dominion status, so that the Indian government could be run by Indians with certain autonomy. In regard to the Muslim demand for separate electorates, Mahatma Gandhi made it clear that framing a constitution should have precedence over the communal problem. So, in the same round table conference, the Muslim, on the behalf of Muslim League, had demanded for separate electorates or separate elections to be conducted for the Muslims. But Mahatma Gandhi rejected this appeal and pointed out that framing of a constitution was more important than the communal problem or the problems of certain communities. The British government refused to accept the basic demand for freedom on the basis of immediate grant of dominion status. So, the dominion status demanded by Gandhi is rejected by the British government. The British government doesn't show the readiness to grant dominion status to Indians at this point. And as a result, the conference broke down and Mahatma Gandhi returned to India. So, this conference didn't have any effect or was not effective, because whatever demands were kept in front by Gandhi was not accepted by the British. So, Gandhi had to return back. So, sometimes the question which comes on this topic is, write a note on the second round table conference. So, here you will have to mention that how in the first conference there was no participation of Congress, and then in the second round table conference happens as a result of the Gandhi-Irwin Pact and the compromises that reaches between Gandhi and Lord Irwin, and as a result the Congress decides to suspend the civil disobedience movement and participate in the second round table conference. So, this is the background of the participation of Indians in the round table conference, and then you will have to explain what happens in the round table conference, what is the demand which is kept forward by Gandhi, that is the demand for dominion status, and how the British rejects such a demand. Now, we look into what a communal award is and what is the significance of it in Indian history. So, since the Indian delegates at the second round table conference failed to arrive at a settlement on the communal issue, The British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald, he is the British Prime Minister during this period, and the Prime Minister announced his scheme of minority representation known as the Communal Award. So, we saw in the second roundtable conference, the Muslim League is demanding for a separate electorate, and how Gandhi says that the demand for dominion status is more important than the communal question. But because of it being not discussed in the roundtable conference, what we see is the settlement of communal issue is taken up by the British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald, and he announces a scheme of minority representation which came to be known as the Communal Award. And according to the scheme which is put forward by the British Prime Minister, we see that besides the Muslims, the scheme gave separate representation to the Indian Christians and Europeans. So, as the name itself suggests, the minority representation question is taken up by the British Prime Minister, and we see separate representation is now given to not only Muslims but Indian Christians and Europeans who resided in India. And it provided separate seats for untouchables. So, another group which gets special consideration is the untouchables of the society, and they are also given separate seats. And it led to the separation of the scheduled caste from the Hindus at large. The Hindus were also given representation in the northwestern frontier province where they were in minority. So, in the northwestern frontier province, Hindus were in minority. So, the Hindus were given representation in the northwestern frontier province. And the Sikhs in the Punjab and the Europeans in Bengal were given more seats in proportion to their population. Even the Sikhs and the Europeans in Bengal were given more seats. Compared to their proportion, they were given more seats. So, sometimes the question which comes is, what is communal award? So, this is a settlement on communal issue, and it is put forward by the British PM Ramsay MacDonald, and according to this scheme, not only Muslims but the other sections or the other minority sections in the society are also given special consideration and separate electorate. So, now we look at the signing of the Poona Pact between Gandhi and Ambedkar. So, here the separation of the scheduled caste from the Hindus was a bombshell for Mahatma Gandhi. So, as per the communal award which we now just looked at, and it was declared by Ramsay MacDonald, and according to the scheme which he put forward, we see that the scheduled caste, that is the untouchables, were separated from the larger Hindu section, and it was a very big shock for Gandhi. To protest against the communal award, he began his fast unto death. So, this separation of the scheduled caste from the Hindu sections was not acceptable for Gandhi, and he started his fast unto death as a symbol of protest. The government did not care to save his life. That is, the British government was least bothered to save his life, or accept his demand. His demand was not to give separate electorate for the scheduled caste. The condition of Mahatma Gandhi began to deteriorate. So, in this situation, the Indian leaders could not remain indifferent to the problems created by the award. So, when Gandhi has gone into fast and the situation is so tense, the Indian leaders find it very difficult to get a solution to this problem. And ultimately, after much deliberations or discussions, Gandhiji and Dr. Ambedkar reached an agreement which is called the Poona Pact. So, after a lot of talk, we see Gandhi and Ambedkar. Ambedkar was the representative of the scheduled caste sections in the society. He was the leader of the Dalits. So, an agreement is reached between Ambedkar and Gandhi. According to this agreement or the pact, seats were reserved for the scheduled caste, but their election was to be through general electorate from a panel of names chosen by them in a primary election. So, the separate electorate demand was put on hold, but separate seats and reserved seats were given for the scheduled caste so that their representation could happen in a better way. So, this is the agreement which was finally reached between Gandhi and Ambedkar, and it was termed as the Poona Pact. So, the question which comes in relation to this particular topic is, what led to the signing of Poona Pact between Gandhi and Ambedkar? So, the reasons we saw how the separate electorate for scheduled caste made scheduled caste as a separate unit from the Hindu caste society, and this was something unacceptable for Gandhi, and Gandhi demanded that the separate electorate should be called off. So, and he goes into fast, and then it puts pressure on Ambedkar, who is the representative of the Dalits in the society, and then comes a compromise or an agreement between Gandhi and Ambedkar, and this agreement is then termed as the Poona Pact. So, in the series of conferences taking place between Indians and the British government, we see that the third round table conference also gets called by the British government. So, the British government held third round table conference at London from 17th November to 24th November 1932. So, this third RTC is happening between 17th November to 24th December 1932, and the issue is to solve the constitutional problem of India. So, the question of constitution is what is discussed in the third round table conference. In the second round table conference, we saw the question of dominion status and the minority issues are discussed, and in the third round table conference, the focus is on the question of a constitution for India. The Congress did not participate in this conference. Only the loyalists to the British government and the communal leaders took part in it. So, similar to the first round table conference, we see that Congress is not participating in the third round table conference, and only loyalists or who are friends of the British government, who are very loyal and committed to the British government, and the religious leaders, the leaders of different religious sects, are taking part in the third roundtable conference. And this conference only confirmed the decisions which had been taken in the previous two conferences. So, there was no change in the British attitude, and we see that whatever decisions were taken in the earlier conferences were confirmed. There was no change in any of the decisions which were taken in the earlier conferences. And we see, following this, the British government published the recommendations of the three conferences in a white paper in March 1933. So, after the third roundtable conference in the 1932, in 1933, whatever recommendations were made in the conferences, all the three roundtable conferences, are written down in a white paper and published in 1933. And it threw light on the future constitution of India and administrative reform. So, this recommendations published throw light on the future constitution of India, how a constitution of India will be and how will it be framed. So, these were expressed in this published recommendations. And also there was mention about the administrative reform, what all reforms were going to take place in the administration and to what extent Indians will also be given a participation in the administrative affairs. A joint parliamentary committee of both the houses of the British Parliament deliberated on the white paper. So, all the recommendations made in the RTC was published in this white paper, and the British Parliament discussed these recommendations in the Parliament. On the basis of report of this committee, a bill was passed in the British Parliament, which is also known as the Government of India Act 1935. So, in 1933, the recommendations are published and it is then discussed in the Parliament, and as a consequence of this, in the 1935 Government of India Act 1935 gets passed in the Parliament. So, at this point we see there is a reception or a continuation or a restart. A restart of the civil disobedience movement. We had seen that before the second roundtable conference, it was suspended. Civil disobedience movement was suspended by the Congress, but now there is a resumption or a restarting of the civil disobedience movement again. The Congress called upon the nation to resume or restart the civil disobedience movement. So, the Congress is requesting the people of the nation to restart the civil disobedience movement. The new Governor General, Lord Wellington, launched upon a policy of unprecedented repression to crush the Congress. So, when the decision comes to resume civil disobedience movement, we see that the new Governor General, whose name is Lord Wellington, launches repression against the Congress leaders, or he violently suppresses the leaders of the Congress. Gandhiji and other prominent Congress leaders were arrested and party was declared as illegal. So, the repressive measures of Lord Wellington consisted of arresting leaders like Gandhiji and declaring the Congress party as an illegal body. And in this period, over 1,20,000 people were arrested. Lathi charges, physical beating, confiscation of property and collective fines were frequently resorted to by the government. So, along with police violence, there are confiscation or taking up of people's property and fining the people and jailing them were all measures taken by the government. National newspapers were again placed under censorship. So, the national newspapers were also censored and were kept under control. Gradually, the civil disobedience movement began to show signs of decay. So, now because of the leaders being in jail and all the repressive measures led to a decay or a slowing down of the civil disobedience movement. And as a result, the Congress officially suspended the movement in 1934. So, as a result, the Congress had to suspend the movement finally in the year 1934. Gandhiji and other Congress leaders were released. So, following the suspension of civil disobedience movement, the leaders like Gandhiji were released from the jail. And for some time again, Mahatma Gandhi withdrew from active politics. Similar to what he had done after the calling off of non-cooperation movement, we see that after the suspension of the civil disobedience movement, Gandhi withdrew from active politics for a while. Now, we will look at the Government of India Act 1935. We saw how it got passed in the British Parliament and what are the factors that are leading to the passing of the Government of India Act 1935. So, on the basis of discussions in the Round Table Conference, the British government passed the Government of India Act 1935. The Act served as the Constitution of India till it was replaced by the Constitution of Independent India in 1950. So, this worked as something like a Constitution of India till 1950, when it was replaced by the Constitution of Independent India. The Act was severely condemned by all parties of India. So, the 1935 Government of India Act was not something which was happily accepted by different sections of Indians, and they were disappointed with the particular act. Mr. Jinnah, leader of Muslim League, called it as thoroughly rotten, fundamentally bad and totally unacceptable. So, this is exactly what he said about the Government of India Act 1935, that it is thoroughly rotten, fundamentally bad and totally unacceptable. Similarly, Jawaharlal Nehru also said that the Act gave machine with strong brakes but with no engine. So, it was a futile or a useless act because it had strong brakes but no engine. So, it was an ineffective act. Now, we will look at the life of Gandhi between 1937 and 47. What is happening in life of Gandhi in these 10 years. According to the provisions of the Government of India Act 1935, elections were held in all 11 provinces in 1937. So, elections happen in different provinces and provincial governments are formed in different provinces. the Congress won thumping majorities in 7 out of 11 provinces. So, it was Congress who emerged as the leaders in 7 out of 11 provinces. Congress ministries were formed in July 1937 in 7 provinces. So, in all the 7 provinces where the Congress won, Congress ministries were formed. Later, Congress formed coalition governments in 2 other provinces. So, there is a coalition government, that is, they allied with other regional parties or religious parties to form the government in the other 2 provinces. Only Punjab and Bengal had non-Congress ministries. So, to the end, we see that only in Punjab and Bengal that we had non-Congress ministries, and in all other provinces there was the Congress ministry. So, now it is the period of the Second World War. In September 1939, 2 years after the Congress ministries were formed, the Second World War broke out. So, just after 2 years of the formation of Congress ministries in the province, we see that the Second World War broke out. Gandhiji and Jawaharlal Nehru strongly criticized Hitler and his Nazi party. So, the presence of Hitler was very decisive in the World War II, and both Gandhi and Nehru were not in favor of Hitler's position. Accordingly, they promised Congress support to the British. Accordingly, they promised Congress support to the British in the war effort if in return they promised to grant independence once the war came to an end. So, now because of the Congress leaders being against Hitler, and in the Second World War we know that the British is fighting the German or the Hitler. So, here we see that the Congress shows the readiness to support British in the war, because British is fighting Hitler, and the Congress leaders feel that the position of Hitler is wrong and he is a dictator. So, he has to be defeated. So, now Congress says that they are ready to support the British in the Second World War if in return they grant them complete independence. So, after the war, if the British is ready to grant independence to India, they can support the British in the war efforts. But we see that the British turned down the offer. The British was not ready to take this offer which was put in front by Congress. In protest, the Congress ministries resigned in October 1939. So, the Congress ministries as a reaction resigns in 1939. During 1940 to 41, Gandhiji thought of Satyagraha as the best course of action. So, in 40 to 41, Gandhi again thinks about going into Satyagraha to meet the demands of the Indians. According to this program, the men and women of India were to protest individually against dragging of India into the war and the government attack on the right of speech. So, this time Gandhiji goes into Satyagraha and asks every individual to start Satyagraha to show our disappointment to the British efforts to drag India. Without Indians' consent, Indians are forced to participate in the war in supporting the British. So, to show our opposition to such an effort, Gandhi asked different sections in the society to start individual Satyagraha. They were to disassociate themselves from the war effort publicly and to accept arrest. So, in this form of satyagraha, people were asked to disassociate themselves from the war effort. People were asked not to contribute to the war efforts or not to take part in the war as such, and to accept arrest. And if there was a force on you to be part of the war efforts, you could accept arrest than go for serving the British. So, it is the same time we see that there is a demand for separate state during this period. So, meanwhile, on 23rd March 1940, the Lahore session of Muslim League, so the session of Muslim League party, passed a resolution demanding the partition of the country and creation of a separate homeland for the Muslims, which was to be called Pakistan. So, it is in 1940 in the Lahore session of Muslim League, a resolution gets passed which makes the demand for the partition of the country and creation of a separate homeland for the Muslims, which was then to be called Pakistan. In his speech at this session, Mr. Jinnah demanded Muslims are a nation according to any definition of a nation. They must have their homeland, their territory and a state. So, this is the demand which is kept forward by Jinnah, asking for a separate state for the Muslims. It made the political landscape now complicated. So, now the political landscape is becoming all the more complicated because on one side there is pressure over India from the British to participate in the war efforts, and on the other side there is Muslim League which is asking for the partition of the country and the separation of Indian nation. Meanwhile, on 23rd March 1940, the Lahore session of Muslim League, so now we see the situation is becoming very complicated. So, it is no longer Indians versus the British. It is not longer just Indians are demanding something and the British is denying it. Instead, it had rather become a three-way struggle between the Congress, the Muslim League and the British. Now, there are three players in the scene, which is Congress, the Muslim League and the British. So, the situation becomes very tense and complicated. At this time, Britain had an all-party government whose Labour Party members were sympathetic to Indian demands, but whose Conservative Prime Minister Winston Churchill was a die-hard imperialist. So, now the party which is ruling in London or in Britain is the Labour Party, where the members of this party were sympathetic to the demands of Indians. But the Prime Minister, who was now Winston Churchill, was a die-hard imperialist who did not pay attention to the demands which were made by the Congress or the other Indian leaders. By the end of the year 1941, the war had spread to Southeast Asia. So, the Second World War by this time comes to Southeast Asia. But when the Japanese invaded Burma and occupied Rangoon on 8th March 1942, the British government earnestly wanted cooperation of Indians in the war efforts. So, now when the war was coming near to the regions of India, and especially when the Japanese invaded Burma, which lies very close or which was part of the Indian territory during that time, Britishers under the pressure feels that they will need Indian support to fight in the World War.